Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christina Wynn, and I'm the Director of the Prince William County Department of Economic Development. As a member community of the NOVA Economic Development Alliance, I want to thank you for participating in the first of our 12-part webinar series titled Beyond COVID-19, NOVA Business Resiliency Webinars. I know that each of you have endured hardships as we have closed our schools and our businesses, canceled programs and events, and stayed at home over the last month, all in an effort to keep our friends, our neighbors, our families, and our coworkers safe. But it's been inspiring to see how our region has responded during this crisis, acting collectively because we care. Though many of you might feel like you're operating in survival mode, we're here to get you ready to think about tomorrow and help you emerge from this stronger than ever. Today, we're going to get you started with COVID-19 Business Survival Toolkit, which will equip you to operate your business in this new reality. Thanks again for joining. I'm now going to turn it over to John, who will be moderating today's webinar.
All right, thanks, Christina, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon. My name is John Jacobs. I was asked to moderate this session and actually the entire series from NOVA EDA. This is our kickoff webinar session, so we appreciate your joining us, and we will focus on the issues that are most critical to you and your businesses. Just a quick agenda. We heard just now from Christina Wynn in Department of Economic Development, Prince William County. We'll have several speakers. I'll go through those in just a moment. But before I do, I just wanted to provide a bit of an update today as to where we are. And these are just the stats that I actually picked up this morning to give us some context to the magnitude of the issue so that we have a good grounding. As you well know, the U.S. Senate on Tuesday approved a $484 billion coronavirus relief package. It is now with the House of Representatives, who will today have the opportunity to start voting in groups because of limitations on gatherings. Also, as of today, the Wall Street Journal reported that we have unemployment filings in the United States reaching 26.5 million. There is that. U.S. coronavirus cases, a number of cases, according to Johns Hopkins University, up in Baltimore, worldwide 2.6 million cases, U.S. cases 843,000, and U.S. deaths as of yesterday 46,785. To give an idea, just from yesterday to today, where we are, as of February this year, according to Gartner Research, full-time remote workers in the United States were 4.7 million, or 3.4% of the U.S. workforce. As of April 14th, according again to Gartner's more recent survey, the U.S. workforce working remotely is 81%. And that is accounting to half of the HR professional respondents. So it's significant uptick in those working remotely, either partly or fully. Gartner further predicts that in the post-COVID environment, 41% of workers will be working remotely, either again, fully or in part. To discuss these issues in greater detail, we have three great guests today. I'd like to introduce Antonio Das of the U.S. Small Business Administration, Amber Clayton of the Society of Human Resource Management, and Cliff Bartlett with K-12 Corporation, online distance learning professional organization. So let's kick off, if we could, with Antonio. And Antonio, please take it away.
All right, John, thank you very much. Let me pull up a quick little slide deck here. So what I want to do, one is again, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining, taking the time out of your day. And we have some information we want to share with you related to really the whole thing everybody's dealing with, which is coping with COVID-19 and its impact on us. And we're going to cover a couple of the tools and resources. In particular, I want to focus on an element of the CARES Act that is less known. So I want to talk about that for a bit, as well as a loan payment option, or loan deferral of payment options, I should say. And then I'll get into our two principal programs, the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection Program. So the first one I want to cover is the Small Business Debt Relief Program. This is the one that is almost never in the news anywhere. Everybody's focused on PPP for a lot of good reasons, as PPP is short for Paycheck Protection Program. Now, this particular program is funded through the proceeds that came out of the CARES Act. So it's a component of the CARES Act. And essentially what we'll do, SBA, if you have an existing SBA loan, whether it's one of our 7A programs, 504, or our microloan program, we'll cover 6 months of your payments, including your principal, your interest, and any monthly fees that you have.
Antonio, sorry, John, just
Yes.
I don't think we're seeing your slides. Are you in sharing your screen mode? And
Let's see.
hopefully
Let me go back to where we were and see what happened here.
Okay.
I think at first it didn't want to let me do it. Maybe that's what it was.
I see.
We'll try it one more time.
Okay.
Can you see anything yet?
I do not.
All right, we'll give it one more shot here. Let's see. Let's try it again.
Yes, you're coming. There you go. All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So I've talked to that part already. And here we are. Okay, excellent. Here we are now with the Small Business Debt Relief Program. And again, the big thing with this particular program is if you have an existing loan, or if you're getting ready to take out an SBA loan. Now, not one of the PPP loans, not one of the economic injury disaster loans, but let's just say your business, by virtue of this, is actually having expansion opportunities, or maybe you're in the middle of an acquisition of another piece of equipment, or even a business or something to that effect, or building for your business. You can use SBA loan funds to make those acquisitions or the advances of your business happen. So it's not working capital, just working capital related. We will pay on a brand new SBA loan that gets closed before September 27th. We'll pay your principal, interest, and your monthly fees for the first 6 months. Again, this is part of the CARES Act. It's not talked about a lot. It's very valuable for businesses who have a need. Many businesses were already in the expansion mode of some sort or another, and if it still fits, this is something I would definitely want to make sure people have awareness of. Another thing that is not necessarily talked about as much, but the federal regulatory agencies like the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the FDIC, National Credit Union Administration, Federal Reserve, they all sent a month or so ago now a joint letter to all of the financial institutions saying, work with your business clients, work with them if they need to have a loan restructured, if they need to have loans placed in deferment, do so, help and support them. And in turn, we're telling you as financial regulators, in that letter they said they will not penalize the lender in a way that they normally would for a loan that is considered to be not a good loan at that point, to something that's non-performing. So what that might mean is maybe you have a loan outstanding that's not an SBA loan. You can still get debt relief from your bank or lender. And so that's a conversation you have with those folks, and they can help you through that process. So as we move into the two featured programs, the economic injury disaster loan, as well as the Paycheck Protection Program, I have this fancy little disclaimer here that basically says, due to a lapse in appropriations, we're not able to accept new applications. And of course, we've got a House vote coming just in a matter of short hours here today. And there's a unanimous approval of this legislation that happened yesterday. So, this is lining up favorably for approval, and hopefully we'll get new funding very soon. So until that time, it's for information purposes, and we can discuss what other changes may come up different in the program, because I know there's some things that are in the legislation that are a little bit different, but it's hard for me to comment on those until it's actually law. All right, so the Paycheck Protection Program, this is available for small businesses, for nonprofits. It's a big thing for us to do nonprofit financing at SBA, because typically only in disaster situations do we do nonprofits. We're a for-profit entity in terms of the types of businesses that we support, but it also includes tribal organizations, veterans organizations. And the framers of the legislation were really, really careful to make sure that we had in this ways to accommodate very small businesses, as well as some of the unique situations that happens with food services and accommodation, lodging, hotel type businesses, because those are some of the ones that were most significantly hit right off the bat. People weren't able to travel, so the hotel industry really took a big hit. And restaurants, public gathering likewise had a big hit. We can fund up to $10 million to this program. It's 2.5 times the average monthly payroll cost. That's essentially what we use as our factor. So that gives you payroll, and it gives you a little bit extra for working capital as a business. The major function of this, or major feature of this program that really has caught on to people, is the loan forgiveness component. So if the borrower is using 75% or more of the funds under the authorized purposes, which really gets down to payroll expenses, and some limited working capital expenses for lease expense or mortgage interest, for example, you can have that entire amount forgiven. So that's a major thing. I've never seen us actually have something like that in our programs. And it's a streamlined process. There's no collateral. There's no payment even required for 6 months. So that's a short version of the Paycheck Protection Program. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan similarly is got the same type of entities who are eligible. The difference is the funding on this is at $2 million for a maximum as opposed to $10 million. These loans are done directly by SBA, so they are not gone. You don't go through a bank to get the SBA loans, the Economic Injury Disaster loans, as compared to the Paycheck Protection Program loans, which you do go through a bank to get. Again, the interest rate is still attractive at 3.75%. The use of funds, very similar working capital. It doesn't have quite as much of a firm requirement that the amount used, say, for payroll is limited just to 8 weeks period. It doesn't have that type of restriction. It's working capital, but it's a 30-year term. 30-year term is associated with mortgages typically. And so the agency has tried to say, let's just make sure if you have to take this loan out that you're not stuck trying to pay this back when you're still trying to grow your revenue. And to help make that happen even more, we've got the first 12 months of your payments where you don't have to make any payments at all. It's deferred for that full year. And so these are the two major items that we have. When we get to the Q&A part, we can, of course, answer more questions related to it. And then the last piece I just want to quickly touch base on is the wealth of support we have through our resource partners, SCORE, Small Business Development Centers, Women Business Centers, and our Veterans Business Outreach Centers, all which have locations in the Northern Virginia community and are there to provide free individual one-on-one coaching and guidance and support. And this is a perfect time to take advantage of those institutions and their skills, and there's not a charge for sitting down and talking to these folks. So I will turn it back to you, John, at this point.
Great. Thank you, Antonio. I will I neglected to note that, but Antonio did touch on it, that we are taking questions. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab. If you just mouse over that, you'll be able to submit questions. And we'll get these questions, and I will do my best to go through them and hopefully hit them all. But if not, we will have these questions, we'll save them, and we'll try to get answers to those that we aren't unable to ask. So mouse over. For Mac users, I think it's at the top of your screen to reveal. So just want to make that point. Thank you very much, Antonio. Our next panelist is Amber Clayton with the Society of Human Resource Professionals, SHRM. Amber has been very good in joining a number of webinars lately, as has Antonio. But I'd like to hear from you now. Over to you, Amber, please.
All right, thank you, John. All right, let me get my screen up here. Are you seeing my presentation?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Like John said, I'm Amber Clayton, Knowledge Center Director at SHRM, and what I do is we have a contact center of HR professionals who help our members with their HR related questions. And so we're getting a lot of questions in these days. This is very high level, not all inclusive. There's much more to this, and I'm going to try to get through my slides here. So one of the things that I wanted to address is what decisions do you need to make and when? And
Amber, sorry, Amber, could you put it in slideshow mode? Is that possible?
oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was.
No.
Let's see. Is it now?
Not just yet.
Okay. Let's see.
If not, we're fine. We can read it, but be a little bit bigger, that's all.
Okay. Let's see. Let me try it one more time. No.
That's fine. Go ahead, please. And I'll say to the audience also, we'll have these slides, or the majority of these slides, available afterwards in any case. Sorry, Amber, please go
Okay.
ahead.
Great. How about now? Let me see here. I just want to make sure.
Just about there.
Okay.
You're closer.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and still move forward.
Sure.
All right. So, so basically, one of the questions, of course, you have to answer is, are you going to open or not? And, you know, with Virginia, you obviously know there's a stay-at-home order right now, so only essential businesses can actually stay open. However, there are businesses that can still operate, but may not be able to operate in their physical facilities. So one of the things that, of course, employers need to think about right now is, can the work be done remotely, or can we actually create something different so that it can still operate? For example, if a restaurant had only dine-in, then maybe they might be able to explore offering delivery or takeout. The other thing that you want to look at too is whether or not it's safe to actually be at the physical location if you are able to. Can you make sure that it's safe for your employees, for your customers, and your vendors? So that's a question that you have to ask yourselves, as well as what is the impact of actually staying open? Will you have enough business to financially cover the labor and the overhead? Will your employees be able to work or get to work? Some transportation is actually not available right now. Or will you be able to get your shipments delivered to serve your customers? And all of those things are things that you need to consider with regards to opening or not. The big one, of course, is safety. And many of you probably already know that under OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that each employer has an obligation to actually keep their businesses safe and free from harm or injury or illness to their employees. And so, of course, we hear a lot about social distancing. And one of the things that the businesses need to think about is, if they're going to stay open, if they're essential business and they have the facilities, can you still social distance within that facility? For example, do you have employees sitting in every other cubicle? Are they able to stand or sit 6 feet apart if it's a manufacturing line? So those types of things you have to think about. Stores, as we know, you've probably been in the grocery stores recently, they're only letting a few customers in at a given time. So these are things that need to be considered. The other thing that needs to be considered is work schedules. And some employers are actually staggering the schedule so that there's not a lot of employees at the site at a given time. So that's something to think about. Also, too, whether or not you give break times. Some employers give break times at the same time, and you may want to consider staggering that as well, so there's not so many people in the break rooms. Another thing is equipment. Do you have the equipment necessary to keep the business safe? Of course, there could be things such as providing masks, gloves, your normal personal protective equipment, PPE, fixtures. As you know, again, grocery stores putting up this plexiglass in front of the cash registers to make sure that the employees and the customers are safe. And that goes along the lines of the modifications to the work site. So as John said, many employers right now are allowing people to work remotely. And I believe you said, John, over 80% are actually working remotely right now. And that's something that, you know, employers need to figure out whether or not the roles that they have within their organization can actually work remotely. Some can't. And so, again, you may need to find some alternatives to that, or maybe some adjustment in the roles of the individual where they could potentially work from home. So for example, if you have a field sales rep, maybe they're doing more phone calls versus face-to-face meetings or traveling. The other thing to think about when you're managing remotely is equipment. Do they have the necessary software, the computer, laptop, mouse, monitor, keyboard, phone, everything that they need in order to be able to work productively? So you've got to think about that as well as can they use their own personal devices to actually work? Some employers have bring your own device policies, BYOD, and they can certainly implement those and use those during the remote work, but you want to make sure that the information is safe. So you may have to install certain software just to try to help prevent cyber attacks. Maybe doing some additional training with your employees to understand what it means to see a phishing email. So training will be important as well if you're allowing remote work. The other thing too is policies. Your policies, regardless of whether or not you're at the work site or at the home, which is now your alternate work site, policies still apply. And that even includes dress and appearance. We're seeing these days on Facebook, some of the situations. I think I saw something with a reporter the other day where her husband was taking a shower behind her. You've got to train your employees to make sure that they're equipped to be able to work from home, and when they're on video conference or when they're on conference calls, that they don't have anything inappropriate in the background, that they are keeping and maintaining a professional appearance, that they're not in their pajamas. So those types of things can still be implemented when employees are working from home. You also want to reinforce your sexual harassment policies as well as your discrimination policies. If someone does happen to have something in the background, you want to make sure that employees are not actually using that to discriminate against other employees. Again, train your managers, train your employees, and just keep them engaged and motivated. I think that's one of the challenges that we have right now with teleworking is making sure that we are touching base and communicating with our employees and keeping them engaged. So aside from opening or not, a lot of the challenges that employers are finding right now is whether or not they need to close their business. And before closing, I would encourage employers to look at the alternatives to downsizing. Some of the alternatives might be a hiring freeze. You might have the organizations that we actually surveyed said that they're no longer hiring. Another 19% are actually considering it. Some essential businesses, though, like those grocery stores, like liquor stores, they're still hiring right now. If you have any travel, any perks that you might want to cancel, that could be expensive. That's another way to cut some cost. A lot of employers are freezing and cutting salaries. We have seen in our survey about 19% of the organizations have already decreased their pay rates, and another 21% are actually considering it. There's also programs like voluntary retirement as well as separations, voluntary separations. Of course, you're probably asking, why would someone voluntarily resign? Well, some employees might want to resign, especially if there's a severance package offered. So that is another alternative. And then the other one, eliminate overtime. I think that's an obvious one to be able to reduce some of the costs, and also to furlough. Now, we are getting a lot of questions from employers about whether or not they should furlough or lay off employees. And the distinction between a furlough is that a furlough is a temporary reduction of hours or an unpaid leave of absence. And it's keeping those employees on the payroll. So they're still active employees with the organization. It's just that they're not getting paid. Maybe it's a chunk of time, like a 2-week unpaid furlough, or maybe an employer does a furlough where they have off every Friday for the next couple of months. That is one that many employers are actually doing. And of course, they have questions around those furloughs, like how long can an employee be furloughed? That is up to the employer. If they have benefits, for example, you may have to look at your benefit plan documents to see whether or not their health insurance can actually continue during this time. You may also have to look at your state laws with regards to paying out vacation. I know California, for example, considers furlough a termination of employment after a certain period of time, and they may have to pay out their vacation to those. I don't believe that Virginia has anything, but still you just want to check your Virginia Department of Labor for that information. So outside of the alternatives, of course, we're facing downsizing, unfortunately, for some employers. And layoff, basically what a layoff is if someone is furloughed and they're no longer recalled to work, it then becomes a layoff. Some employers go straight to a layoff. And in those types of situations, that is a separation of the employee from the payroll, and it is with the intent to return to work. And so if someone is not recalled to work, then it becomes a reduction in force, which is actually a termination, no recall to work at that point. And during those downsizes, you have to think about the things that you need to do with regards to termination notices. Again, some states have notices that you need to provide to them when they terminate. One of them being COBRA, which is a continuation benefit for health insurance. Virginia has a mini COBRA law for employers that have under 20 employees. Federal, of course, is over 20 employees, and there are notification requirements for COBRA. There's also the WARN Act, which is the Workers Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. There is a federal WARN, but there's also state WARN Acts as well. I don't believe that Virginia actually has one, though, but under federal law, notice needs to be required as soon as possible. Normally it's 60 days in any other situation, but due to the pandemic, it's actually been loosened up a bit, and employers need to let the employees know as soon as possible if they're being laid off. And then again, termination notices, some states require unemployment notices. There's issues with regards to benefits and final pay. All of those things need to be considered when someone is letting an employee go. And post-COVID, and I have my happy people doing their happy dance there, coming back to work. Of course, again, you want to think about the safety measures. Is it safe to reopen? Are you going to need to do anything other than your typical safety practices right now? And more than likely, you probably will be doing that. There'll be questions around, will you be able to test employees with their temperature? That's still to be seen. The EEOC that administers the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, has, under the pandemic, has allowed for employers to take temperatures of employees, or to employees to voluntarily take and give that information to their employers. After the pandemic, though, it's still not clear whether or not employers were going to be able to do that, or if it's still going to be considered a medical exam where an employer has to prove that it's job related based on business necessity, or potentially a direct threat to someone's safety or someone else's safety. So we're still waiting for guidance on, after the pandemic, what employee testing might look like, whether it's the COVID antibody testing or the temperature testing. As far as communication, you want to keep in contact with those who've been laid off and furloughed. That's really important. And you want to make sure that you do communicate to them when they come back, addressing any concerns that they have, because some employees are going to be concerned about coming back to work and whether or not it's safe. So that's all the things that you need to do, as well as figure out, what is your company culture going to look like now after post-COVID? Are your mission statements, your vision statements, are those going to stay the same? Do you have guiding principles? Are those going to stay the same? So it's not just thinking about the physical facilities, the safety and the concerns, but also the culture and how that's going to change as a result of this pandemic. So we do have, I know that's a lot to cover in a lot of time, but we do have some resources that are available. Our organization, SHRM, is a membership organization, but we do have some resources that are available to non-members if you're interested.
All right, great, Amber. Thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry, just one second. I'm just trying to orient myself to myself. That's great. Thank you. So our next panelist is Cliff Bartlett, who is with K12 Corporation, VP of, oh gosh, Cliff, is it applications development and implementation? Is that correct?
We probably have a few extra words there. Basically, I do software development.
Okay, awesome. So review, please take over and make your presentation.
Hi. So as John said, my name is Cliff Bartlett, and I currently work at K12 Inc. We are basically a virtual charter school management company. And the good news for us is all of our students, teachers, and a lot of our infrastructure was always already virtualized. But we did have to go through the struggles of first separating physical distancing at work, and then ultimately transitioning to a fully remote workforce that particularly for our call centers was not particularly easy. The perspective I bring is I've basically been working with information technology for over 2 decades. And when John asked me, what advice would you have for a small and medium-sized business in the digital context, my first thought was get back to the basics. First, evaluate your collaboration, your online presence, your scalability and security, and then extend your online capabilities. And there are a myriad of options for doing that as well. There we go. Drilling into collaboration, the first thing you're going to want to do is define what tools you're using and make sure your people know how to use them. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack, those are three very popular ones. And I've included some screenshots on the right, and hopefully many of you are almost certainly already familiar with those. I would also encourage you to explicitly establish what your online culture is going to be. My boss likes seeing us on video, and he's made that very clear, and we all respect that. But maybe that's right for you, maybe that's not. Maybe you want a more formal structure, maybe you want a less formal structure. We do a lot of screen sharing, and we do a lot of chat, and you know, that's just how it works for us. I would also encourage you to find the fun. A lot of the banter that normally happens just because you're in the same office goes away, and everybody I speak to is just stressed at the end of the day. We're zoomed out, right? Because we've been doing nothing but conference calls and looking at screens all day. You'll probably notice I have a background up, a little reminder that there might be at least one other place I'd rather be than at work. But I would also encourage you to continue recognition, celebrations, even happy hours. Looking at your online presence is also something you're going to want to do. If you're primarily a brick and mortar business, I would first be sure that your customers know how to find you. And if you haven't done so already, you can go to the Google My Business or Yelp, and for paying for free, you can update your information and you can manage it. Change it as your hours change. Change it as different things change with your business. Of course, you want to look at your website. Obviously, it's already professional and reflecting who you are, but I would also take a look at both search engine optimization. What are the things you can do to your website without buying any marketing services that make it easier for your customers to find you when they search in Google or search in other search tools? Or you might even want to invest in some search engine marketing and, for example, go out to Google and pay for certain AdWords. So if people are looking in your area for your services or products, they're more likely to find you. You have to do this all again in social media, and the same principles apply. And what's really interesting to me about social media is just how focused some of the social media marketing can be. You can narrow your demographic that you focus on, where they are, what they're looking for, attributes about the customers, for example, on Instagram, like the example in the lower right, very, very granularly. And the main thing I would encourage you to do is use your online presence to actively communicate with your customers. If you're going to be changing your hours, if you're going to be offering curbside pickup, if you're going to be extending your services into the digital realm, all these online capabilities are a great way to communicate with your customers. And you always want to keep it fresh so your customers are interested in looking back. I would also think about scalability. At K-12, fortunately, many of our applications were already on the cloud. And I'm sure many of you are already using QuickBooks Online, Shopify for e-commerce, Salesforce for CRM, and many, many other products. For those of you that still have applications that are running on your own physical servers, many of those applications can either be replaced with software as a service type applications, or you can run the applications you have on virtualized servers available from leading providers like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And I wouldn't just focus on the technology. I would also think about the people processes. A lot of the things that you take for granted because you're in the same office or meeting in the same conference room need a little bit more structure when you're working remotely. Three of my favorite tools are Checklist. Process Street is one of the leading vendors there. And I'm a huge fan of Trello. It basically allows you to create a to-do list, a very sophisticated to-do list if you want, or keep it simple, but also to share it among your colleagues. And then a project management, Smartsheets is a favorite for me. You also have to think about security. Hopefully you are already, but the more you move into the digital realm, the more vulnerabilities you have. This is certainly the time to be current on your antivirus and your Windows update. And unfortunately, like any crisis, the bad guys are also exploiting it. The number of scams that are related to COVID alone are measured in the millions. Google estimates over 240 million COVID-related spam emails a day alone. The main thing that I would encourage you to do for your business, you've almost certainly done it for your personal bank accounts, is to enable multi-factor authentication. That way, if somebody is able to get your password or credentials or to phish your employees, it prevents or at least dramatically limits their ability to get access to your core system. And for those of you that aren't familiar with multi-factor authentication, all of you are probably already using user ID and password. It creates another mechanism. Oftentimes it can be as simple as a text to your cell phone. Personally, I use an authenticator app. So whenever I log in, I get a little beep on my phone. I press yes, that's me, and it lets me in. So just tying it all back together, I would focus on the basics. And then I would think about how you extend your digital capabilities. What other options do you have for engaging with your customers? Do you have a way of delivering your products and services, maybe not fully, but at least partially online? And as you do this, I mean, the great thing about digital services is often the entry point is very cheap. You don't need to think it all out and figure out your whole strategy. You need to try things, see how they work, look at the results, and then adjust and act again and repeat. And hopefully a lot of the things that you do now during COVID to expand your digital presence will help you long after this pandemic is over. With that, I'll turn it back to John.
Great, great. Thanks very much, Cliff. So as I mentioned a little earlier, we are taking questions, and there are a number of questions coming in, which is fantastic. The panelists can also see your questions. So what we'll try to do is I'm going to jump in and sort of position a couple of these in front of the panelists, and I would encourage the panelists to please, if you see one or two that you think should be called out that you can address, that would be great. So yeah, so we're doing what I just said. Is on the question side. Excuse me 1 second. I'm going to go back here and look at some of these questions which have come in. One question that we have was actually regarding the PPP for Antonio, and it was a question about must companies who have been awarded a PPP loan spend those proceeds within those 8 weeks that were defined, or which, and there are certain thresholds, but I believe the understanding is you have to spend these funds within 8 weeks. Is that correct? We have to need your, it's just unmute. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, that is correct. So the underwriting guidelines that stem from the legislation, along with our interim public rule and the guidance that the Treasury has provided. So SBA and Treasury actually work together on this, states that you have 8 weeks. That money should be spent within an 8-week period. And it goes back to the original intent of what Congress and the administration were looking to do, which is to put money in the hands of businesses so they can pay their employees and not have their employees not be able to pay their rent or car payments or buy you food or whatever regular expenses they may have. And so I know there's some businesses that want to stretch that period out. That's not the purpose of what PPP is for.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And Amber, I don't know if you can answer this directly or perhaps refer to other resources, but one person's asking rather specifically if one doesn't take staff's temperature, or if restaurants reopen and they're not taking the physical temperature, are they able or must they prevent that individual from entering their establishment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And unless it's required by local authorities or the CDC, we don't know yet whether or not temperature taking is going to be required. So employers may want to have some kind of policy or practice in place that says if an employee has a fever for 24 hours, they're not going to be able to return to work. And so if someone is exhibiting symptoms that are COVID related, certainly an employer could ask that individual not to work that day or to go home. If the employer is currently doing temperature taking and someone does have a fever, again, the employer could require that individual to go home.
Okay, great. So, and Antonio, just back to you for a sec. There was this one question on the EDIL loan period. It was a 30-year payback?
It literally is a 30-year repayment, which again, that's unheard of for working capital. And that was one of the points that our administrator, Jovita Carranza, wanted to really make, was she wanted businesses to be able to afford this repayment. They don't obviously have to pay it back over the full 30 years. Hopefully there's some wind at the back of their sails somewhere in these next months and short years, and they could pay it back earlier. But in the meantime, a 30-year repayment gives you a much smaller amount to pay each month than a typical 3-year repayment might be.
You know, one of the issues that I see it in a few questions, but also I've been hearing it in the news quite a bit, is how quickly the PPP disbursement occurred. And now with the new funding coming out, perhaps today or tomorrow, is there any understanding of how quickly we might go through that disbursement?
Yeah, so forecasting is done best when you have data historically that you can compare it to.
Right.
And so we have one shot so far, which is the initial allotment that we had just a few weeks ago, that literally, $349 billion literally was allocated within less than 2 weeks. So whether, there's another 70% of demand that's out there, or if it's just 30% that's out there, we'll know over these next coming days. But, I would encourage people, if they have a need and PPP is the right solution, to act on it.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that. And we're getting a question about, and maybe Amber, I'm going to ask you to sort of address this. This is a business owner who is ill, and can their partner collect unemployment if she's forced to take care of the child who also would have COVID, who has COVID at home? So I guess the question is, on the unemployment insurance side, what's the leeway here? And I'll give you an example. Another question I had to come up was a part-time employee who loses hours. Is there a provision, or are there provisions that would let them make up that gap? Is it through the state unemployment plans?
It is actually. So each state has different eligibility requirements for unemployment. So you would have to look at the Virginia Employment Commission to determine the benefit eligibility. But usually when someone has been laid off, they're terminated, even when they're furloughed, they have reduced hours, reduced salary, that could all qualify that individual for unemployment. So in the situation that you mentioned about the person having to take leave due to childcare or due to caring for somebody with COVID, that would likely probably fall under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA, where someone may be eligible for paid sick time for that reason. They also have paid family, it's an expanded family and medical leave that would allow for individuals to take leave because of the childcare issue. So there are some options out there, and one of the things I would just recommend is even if you're uncertain as to whether or not something qualifies for unemployment, apply anyway, because it's going to take a little while. As we've already seen, we have a lot of people who are unemployed right now, but I would not just forgo applying just because you think that you may not be eligible or your employees might not be eligible.
Great. Cliff, here's a question for you. If you think there are retail operations, including restaurants, that really were not prepared for this massive transition, and they have websites that are essentially marketing websites. But the one question is about taking orders or coming up with a buy cart on their website. To come up with that, a buy cart or a shopping cart, that's the word, shopping cart, thank you. What technology, is that a platform play? Does somebody have to go and get a service to plug into the existing website?
Yeah, a lot's going to depend on what platform your website is on right now. If you're, for example, on WordPress, which is one of the very commonly used platforms by medium and small businesses, they do have a plugin type capability, a partnership where you can extend WordPress to provide that cart-like capability. Another option would be to go to somebody like Shopify or the myriad of other more specialized providers that might even be in the restaurant business and provide value-added features like allowing you to update your restaurants and updating your menus and providing orders online, and then having your website be unchanged, but add a page or maybe a banner at the top where you link out to that. Those are some of the things I've seen others do.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And as I mentioned earlier, we've asked and we'll have on the NOVA EDA website the presentations, and as over time, we'll put on additional links to answer some of these questions, which are a bit granular in their nature. One that interestingly came up, let me just find it right here, apologies. Credit ratings, credit scores for the PPP. So Antonio, if one has poor credit or no credit, does that affect their ability to secure a PPP?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So, this is show and tell, right? This is the loan application. And if you kind of notice, I've got some things in red. Those things I marked in red are the pieces that really deal with credit, but it's not necessarily is your credit score 400 or 800. It is, have you been suspended, debarred? Are you presently involved in any sort of bankruptcy? Have you defaulted on a debt to the federal government? Have you had an SBA loan and didn't pay it before? You're currently delinquent. Those are the kind of things that will kick you out of the PPP program. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any credit score requirement under PPP. We do have a means of checking credit under the economic injury disaster loans. But keep in mind that the PPP, really what it's asking for on the application is, what kind of business are you? What's your business name? Where you're located? What's your, tax identification number, et cetera. And then it's getting to your payroll. So we're not necessarily even looking at your income to see, do you have the capacity to repay this loan? The PPP program was really designed to help businesses continue to make payments to their payroll, to employees through payroll.
Okay, great, thanks. There's one question here, and I know we're a little short on time. See if I can eyeball it here. It was a question about how the monies can be used, and it talked about the grants, and must they be used for COVID-related spending? And I believe we're referring to the, is it IDSL? I always get confused in these letters.
EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan.
So can you talk a bit about the breadth of how those could be applied, those funds?
Yeah, so we don't have a COVID necessarily expense, but it's payroll, it's working capital, it's lease expense, it's rent, it's mortgage interest, it's utilities, light, gas, such to keep your facility going. Those are really the primary purposes for both of those loans. The distinction, PPP has a definite 8-week period and 75% or more for payroll if you wish to be forgiven. Now, if you don't wish to be forgiven of the loan, you don't have to have that 75%. But most people are going for PPP because they're hoping that they can maintain their payroll and have it be forgiven. For the economic injury disaster loan, we don't have quite that same definition. It doesn't have to just be for 8 weeks for payroll.
Amber, here's a question I'm going to maybe ask you to speak to, and I would encourage other panelists, if you have points or want to follow up on any of these as well, please do. When you have a sole proprietor, when you have employees, the difference between furlough and layoff. So if I am furloughed and I'm not receiving any income, my salary anymore, isn't that from the employee's perspective de facto a layoff? And therefore, as the employer, am I at risk of losing that employee as if I had terminated their employment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's why most employers are moving towards a furlough versus a layoff, because in a furlough, it's known to be temporary. And so you want to continue to engage the employees during that time. Some furloughs are really just a couple of weeks is what we're hearing. And during that time, if the employee is still engaged with the employer, it's more than likely that they're going to return. If someone is laid off, however, and there's really no certainty as to when that individual is going to be recalled to work, the employer could potentially lose that individual. They may actually take that opportunity during that layoff to start looking for other work. So there is a chance that that employees may not return to work following a layoff versus following a furlough where they're still an active employee. With a layoff, because it is a separation from employment, there's things that I mentioned about COBRA and continuation benefits. So you are taking them off the payroll. So they're not going to be as committed as if they're still actively employed.
And if somebody is furloughed, not laid off, are they eligible for unemployment themselves?
And yes, in states, and again, you'd have to look at the individual states, but most states would consider a furlough to be a benefit eligible action. If their hours have been cut, if they're on unpaid leave, then usually they would be eligible for unemployment benefits.
Okay, great, thanks. Just checking here for a few more, and then we can I think we've answered a lot of these, and others are quite granular. So I would encourage, we've got these questions, folks, and we will retain the questions, and we'll go through them and try to answer them over the next week or so during this time period. But again, when we populate this webinar on the NOVA EDA website, we'll have other materials available to you as well. So let me just move on here, just one sec. Yeah, so you can find, you will be able to, not just yet because we're filming right now, this webinar and related materials on novaeda.org. So that'll be easy to identify. We are trying to, in this series, keep a steady drumbeat. Every Thursday, 2 p.m. is our goal. Next webinar will be April 30th at 2 Eastern, funding and financing during the age of COVID-19. So a deeper dive in the funding piece, because conversation is broader than what we've been able to capture today. So I would ask you all to put that in your calendar and to join us next week as we begin to craft that webinar. Thank you all very much. Thank you, panelists, very much for joining us today and for your great insights. Appreciate it all very much. Wish everybody a happy and safe rest of this week. Take care. Bye-bye.